Welcome back. 12 Russian intelligence officers indicted for hacking the DNC and Clinton campaign. The president still says it's a witch hunt as he prepares to meet with Putin just days after threatening NATO before dissing the UK's prime minister. Wish we had a Harvard-educated PhD from the London School of Economics who's a former Army paratrooper to talk to. We do. His name is Sean McFate. His family lives right here in Manatee. And he is the author of an upcoming book, The New Rules of War, Victory in the Age of Durable War. Sean, that nonfiction?
It is nonfiction, although it could read like fiction.
I mean, the title of your book is really, and I don't know what the book is about, but it does describe what we're going through these days, because no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, it's almost a daily dose of dizzying news.
Right, so the book comes out in January, but it's written basically about how war is being managed today. And the example of these 12 Russian agents is a perfect example of that. So in the old rules of war, think like World War II, it'd be just tank battalions moving into the enemy to take over the territory. The new rules of war, why take over a country with tanks when you can just manipulate or mess with its elections? And this is what has been going on. So it's a form of political warfare, but other things are happening too, with cyber, with special forces, with espionage. This is just the proverbial tip of the iceberg.
In some ways, I would imagine it's not any different than the way it's been going back decades. Both sides have really done, black ops types of things, but are you saying it's at a level right now and we're only seeing part of what is actually happening, that it really is in some ways a state of war?
In some ways it is. I mean, in some ways, political warfare is, the second or third oldest career in the world, right? And there's nothing new about that. The question is how it's waged today, and do we see it? So, for example, look at what Putin and Russia did in Ukraine. They have the military to straight out invade Ukraine and Crimea. But instead, he uses like Spetsnaz, Russian special forces, mercenaries, proxy militia, artificial intelligence, ways that you don't see in the news. And the reason is this, is because we live in an information age where plausible deniability is more powerful than firepower. That's an example of the new ways of war.
I've had friends say to me that we have been doing the same to other countries for decades, so why is this any different now? Is there a difference between what we may have done in the past and Russia interfering with the election of our president?
Well, there are many countries who say that, including, to some extent, Russia itself, right? They accuse of the U.S. of interfering with their 2011 election. We send out pro-democracy groups around the world to have democratic elections. China doesn't like that. So there is a point of opinion. The U.S. And the U.S. used to be very good at this, whether that's right or wrong, in the 60s and 50s. I think now, though, honoring a country's internal, rules of law, its elections, it is seen as crossing a line.
What do you make over what we've seen over the last few days, starting with NATO, which has really been the bedrock of our defense for has it 70 years now?
49, yeah.
And we have never had a situation where a president of the United States has, from reports, threatened to leave NATO and cause the kind of tumult that we have seen for the last few days, while at the same time saying the easiest part of this foreign trip of his would be meeting with President Putin.
Well, President Trump's very difficult to read.
You think?
So, in some extent, look, Donald Trump ran on a sort of an isolationist platform of getting out of NATO. So he's keeping a campaign promise. And some of the questions he's asking are not unique to Donald Trump. I mean, since the end of the Cold War, NATO has been an organization adrift with its own mission. And for a while, it got into the Balkans. That didn't work out well. Then it got into pro-democracy. That didn't work out well. There was in Afghanistan. That became a mess. And so the question is, what's the utility of NATO? It's a fair question. I think if it was somebody else besides Trump asking it, the reaction could also be a bit different.
Are you concerned about the impact, however, that it's having on our relations with our allies, from the UK to Germany especially, to France, to Canada? Because it seems that we are making those countries our competitors But at the same time, the president is talking about it would be a good idea to add Russia to the G8.
Right. So cozying up to one's adversaries and alienating one's friends never is a good foreign policy.
What would you say to the president's many supporters here on the Suncoast who look at this and say that he is playing some form of three-dimensional chess?
Well, I would have a hard time. I think there could be a lot of element of truth to that. International relations, though, is so much more complex than three-dimensional chess that you never know what you're going into. It's like three-dimensional chess meets the Bellagio casino. So there is a case to be made about being tough on one's allies with Germany and others, as well as trying to win over your adversaries like Putin. However, the question is, how far is too far? I mean, I think it's fair for Donald Trump to question the relationship of energy bought between Germany and Russia. That is a significant question mark. Gerhard Schroeder, who is a former German chancellor, serves today on the board of Gazprom, the leading oil and gas company in Russia. That is a strategic liability. You can't separate military from economic issues because in grand strategy, you have to use all instruments of national power. So I think there is three-dimensional chess going on. I just want to know what their end state looks like.
Well, what do you think that Putin is trying to do here, and what do you think that of what the United States has done, if anything, to countermand that?
Well, Russia does have a grand strategic outlook. They want to extend greater Russia, quote unquote, into Europe and reassert their authority, their sphere of influence. And for them that to happen, they have to erode NATO, and for that to happen, they have to get the U.S. out of NATO, and they're doing that slowly. They're creeping into places like Ukraine, the Balkans, and maybe even the future, the Baltics. And they're doing it not through military means, but through these shadowy means.
Do you think that we, here on the Suncoast and elsewhere, have a real understanding of what these international forces are doing right now and our response for it? Because the passions are so huge on both sides. Either you're for the president, no matter what he does or says,
right,
or those who pull their hair out that this kind of at what he does, what he says, and how he does it.
Right. I mean, the answer is all of us. I live in Washington, D.C., where it's probably much worse than the Suncoast. I mean, everybody is so fixated on pro or con Trump that they lose a bigger picture. And I think that's our biggest concern, is that there are forces at work here that we're not seeing because we're strategically distracted by tweets, et cetera.
And I know you're at Sarasota One tonight to talk about your book, and again, briefly, why a fictional depiction of our wars right now is helpful to understanding what is actually happening today.
So I write a book called Deep Black, and also another one called Shadow War. It's a Tom Locke thriller series, sort of like Tom Clancy, but for this generation. And the reason I wrote it is because it was actually going to be a memoir of some stuff I had done around the world. And my editor was like, no, 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 no. If you write this as a memoir, you'll be sued to death or worse. So, it really kind of lays out some of the forces that we're just talking about, some of the shadowy forces that really have a lot to do about how, international events unfold. And it's not really about the White House or about Moscow. It's the space in between.
Okay, Sean, good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
We want to thank Sean McFate, the author of the upcoming book, The New Rules of War, Victory in the Age of Durable War, which comes out in January, for joining us tonight.